Firstly, I would like to take the time to acknowledge that UBC's campuses are located on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Syilx Okanagan Nation and their peoples. UBC is a community of learners, excuse me, and we have much to learn from the Indigenous stewards of these lands, and you'll see more this afternoon. So welcome to everybody. This is the first, I'll just say that we have had a general meeting in our office, and I think that it's exciting that we are able to do things like this in our own space. And to those who are joining us online, just want to tell you that it's a webinar format, so everyone will be kept on mute. After the film, there will be a group discussion, and you will be welcome to put your questions and comments in the Q&A box. Hopefully, we can get to as many questions as possible. Now, I'm going to turn to our business meeting for today, and I will be short. Most of the updates are upcoming events and deadlines. The Emeritus College has a busy spring ahead. Firstly, the subsidy application forms for scholarly activities are now available online. The deadline to submit is July 16th. You can find the link on our homepage under awards and support. So please think about that. Next, and I'm sure you've heard about this, is UBC Giving Day. And you know it's a 24-hour movement that brings students, alumni, faculty, staff, emeriti, and supporters together to spark generosity and create, I can't memorize, meaningful change. So donating to the college on Giving Day means sustaining meetings such as this one today, workshops such as the estate planning seminar I know that some of you attended, the interdisciplinary interest groups, subsidies for ongoing scholarly activities, information on extended health and travel insurance option, and a broad range of volunteer community activities and more. So a gift to the college is also a gift to UBC. You, our members, possess a wealth of knowledge, and your gift will help to contribute to UBC's reputation for academic excellence and global engagement. I'm happy to announce that the college has an offer of a $10,000 match on Giving Day, thanks to the generosity of one anonymous donor. So please think about this on Giving Day. The college depends on donor generosity year-round. However, please consider making a gift on April the 8th to maximize its impact through the Matching Gift campaign. Now, our newsletter was circulated recently, but if you have not received it, the newsletter is available online, and it is a very, very full newsletter this time, and it's filled with inspiring stories, updates, and college news. So again, if you haven't seen it, please take a look. For those members living in the Okanagan, and I hope you're on Zoom, and further away, please know that the Okanagan Embrace Aging Month is taking place in March. Some of the workshops are held on Zoom, so it's worth checking out their program. You can find the link to these events on our website. The next thing I'd like to announce is that the Emeritus College Patricia Maryville Scholar in Residence program with Green College is welcoming its first scholar. Karen Potvin is a tropical forest. I definitely can't remember. Ecologist. So she's an ecologist from McGill University. Her scientific research studies climate change, carbon cycling, and biodiversity in tropical rainforests, with an additional focus on community empowerment and climate change policy. Catherine will join us on March for a number of events, including one with the Vancouver Institute. And this we are very excited about, that it is the Emeritus College and the Vancouver Institute that are sponsoring her talk. Please visit our website for more information. Now, we would like to invite members of the UBC Emeritus College Climate and Culture Emergency Cohort, Joanne Archibald, Professor Emeritus Educational Studies, Frank Tester, Professor Emeritus Social Work, and Robert Woollard, Professor Emeritus Medicine, for a film screening of All My Relations, addressing climate crisis as cultural dysfunction, and then we will have a discussion. I had the opportunity to see this film in November as part of the cohort session at the Climate Emergency Week in November. And I was so touched by it, and I thought that this would be something that we could all learn from. It was quite inspiring. I hope you feel the same way. So welcome.
Thanks, Sandra. Good. Well, Swayal, everyone. Good to see you here today, and welcome to those who are online. I'm just going to pretend I can see you. I'm Kwam Huyam Tisquich, also known as Joanne Archibald. I'm a citizen of Stalo Nation, and I have ancestry in the Statlium Nation, which is the interior of BC around Lillooet, and Stalo unceded territories are in the Fraser Valley area. I will first share some information about the Climate and Culture Emergency Cohort. The information that I will share comes from a report prepared by the chair of our cohort, Olaf Slaymaker, and Frank Tester. So if you want more details, you can go to the Emeritus College website to find the report that has lots of good detail and more information about this cohort and our various activities. But I'll just give you a brief highlight of some of those and how that connects us to today's session. So the Climate and Culture Emergency Cohort began in 2021, and this cohort supports inter- and transdisciplinary collaborations that address the urgency, scale, and complexity of the climate crisis, climate justice, and biodiversity loss. By connecting scholars, students, artists, disciplines, sectors, and communities, we hope to expand ways of knowing and acting in this socio-ecological moment. So here are some of the activities led by the cohort over the years. In partnership with the former Peter Wall Institute for Advanced Studies, anybody remember that one? We hosted a speaker series of 8 disciplinary and interdisciplinary specialists on aspects of the climate emergency, so we could get a better sense of, what are the ongoing emerging issues, what actions are happening to help inform ourselves and those who attended that speaker series. After that, the next year, we engaged in discussions with the UBC senior leadership, because we felt it was important that UBC as a university start to prioritize this climate emergency and to look at perhaps things in a new way to deal with issues of overshoot, using up our resources faster than they replenish themselves, essentially. And also to think about those future generations. And we wanted UBC to lead as an institution on figuring out how we as a society can address these issues that humans have created. Our cohort members, besides Bob, Frank, and myself today, Olaf Sleemaker is our chair, and other members include Bill Reese, Graham Wynn, Dow Stain, and John Miller. And their bios are, of course, on the Emeritus College website. But our members have written position statements, have created proposals for an international conference, and proposed wise action to bring together different societal sectors and groups to work cooperatively on this climate and culture emergency. So we've moved into this notion of culture and figuring out how us humans have created some of these the problems. So how do we address some of these issues ourselves within society? And we also want to focus a lot on intergenerational interactions. So that's where students come in and younger faculty members. So that's what brings us here today to the film. And before I hand this over to Frank, who will give us some background about the film, and after Frank does that, we'll have Bob introduce some questions that we want you to think about and that we will discuss after the film. But I want to comment on the one area that I have really appreciated with this cohort, and that's the inclusion of Indigenous considerations and perspectives in all that we do. And of course, this Indigenous perspectives and considerations align with the UBC Indigenous Strategic Plan and the Indigenous Strategic Plan of the Emeritus College. And the one example that you'll see, feel, hear, think about today is called All My Relations, as an Indigenous teaching, which could be thought of as philosophy, epistemology, pedagogy, and fancy academic language. That, you know, that is important. That's been a common teaching amongst many Indigenous groups. You know, and it really makes us think about the connections, the relationships, the interdependence that we have, that between the humans, the more than humans, and all aspects of nature. That we have to think of what we do to one thing will influence some other aspect of nature. And that we also think about our relations, these areas of humans, more than humans, all aspects of the environment, as like our family, as our kin. So we have to think about how do we want to treat our families? How do we want to ensure that our families are able to thrive in the future? So that's a teaching All My Relations helps us think about. So I just wanted to share that. And of course, with the youth that you will hear and see today, we think about 7 generations, that we really have to be long-term thinkers, that we want to ensure that the world that they will live in, you know, will help them survive. And with the climate, nature, our culture emergency, you know, there's grave doubt. But wait till you hear what these young folks have to say. So Frank, I'm going to pass this to you, and then after you finish, Bob will say a few words.
Okay, thanks for that, in Inuktitut Koyanamik, and my thanks to you for coming, and to everybody that's online. This film is one in a series that we put together. There is another film that we've produced called Voices, and the next one which we'd like to tackle will be called The Technical Fix, What we want to do is take a critical look at the idea that if we all drive around in a Tesla, we have a few acres of solar panels somewhere just outside of town, we have a few windmills twirling in the wind, and maybe a small nuclear power plant down the road somewhere, everything will be just fine. We can carry on as usual. This challenges the conviction that a lot of us have that the climate environment emergency is not really something that can be addressed by technological innovation and technological means. In fact, the good news when I'm talking, I like to start off by saying that I have good news for you. Climate change is not a problem. It's actually a symptom of something far more serious. And that something is, in fact, what I like to coin by saying, we are consuming ourselves to death. And when you look at it that way, you suddenly realize what a challenge this is, because we live in a society, of course, that is totally based on and survives on the whole idea of growth and progress and development and consumption, and more consumption of whatever it is we're talking about next year than this year. That, in fact, is the goal of every corporation I've ever encountered. The idea is to sell more next year than this year, and thereby, attract investors who will buy shares and feel comfortable about the dividends they're getting or the increase in their value. It's all about growth. And of course, what's announced every day on the news is something to do with the gross domestic product, which, by the way, I think is aptly named because gross is the right word. Our life is associated with growth and progress. And how do we accomplish that? Well, there's only one way of accomplishing that, and that is by taking from nature whatever it is we need to transform into whatever it is we're buying and selling. And that's where the problem lies. So there's 3 films in this series. The first one, Voice, looks at and is the facilitator, by the way, is the former director of the Peter Wall Center, Vanessa Andreotti, who's now with the Faculty of Education at the University of Victoria, and 5 young people, 4 of whom are international students, talking about who's being listened to in all of this discussion about the climate environment emergency? Who's not being listened to? Why aren't they being listened to? And what the heck can we do about it? And how do we feel about not being heard? So that's what the first film called Voice addresses. This one, All My Relations, comes out of my personal conviction based on my experience that Indigenous peoples everywhere in the world share in various ways and various forms an attitude towards a cosmology, if you want to call it, that says lots of things about relationships. Our relationship not just with among ourselves, with others, but with the entire planet, with other species. That the planet is a living entity that we need to respect and relate to in a very different way. And I picked that up because I've been lucky enough to travel and work and live with Indigenous peoples all over the world. From Vanuatu in the South Pacific, I worked with the Maori in New Zealand for 2.5 years. I spent time with tribes in Africa and Mozambique. I lived in Mozambique for a year, and Tanzania for half a year, and in Nicaragua for a while. So this is something that strikes me, that this way of making sense is so profoundly different than what we take for granted by way of how things should be organized and what the goal of life is and what the meaning of life is all about in this culture. That's the problem. So this film involves Siila Watt-Cloutier, Inuk Elder, friend of mine, colleague. She was nominated for the Nobel Prize along with Al Gore for her work looking at the climate environment emergency as a human rights issue. And she is the facilitator of the discussion you're about to see on film with 4 students, all examining this idea that all my relations is really important to making sense of the mess that we're in.
And the film is 48 minutes, just so you can get yourselves ready for that.
And we don't have popcorn, so Anyway, I'm Bob Woollard, and thank you for being here. And as I look out and see so many familiar faces that have profoundly influenced my experience at UBC over the last 30 years, I was a country doc for 2 decades before I came here. And it feels very warm. And part of the warmth then turns to what Frank is calling upon us. Use our skills, use our insight, use our experience. In the best of all worlds, use our wisdom to move forward in a way in which those 7 generations that are following us will respect what we've tried to do. So that's a not so subtle recruitment ad for if you want to join the cohort, please let us know. But if I could have the 5th slide. Is it? Yeah. So after the film, I would like to facilitate a bit of more than a bit of discussion, a bit of sort of profound reflection from this group about what happens. If we're talking about culture change, and as Frank has very eloquently said, we are talking about culture change. There's an emotional component to it. There's an intellectual component. There's a physical component. There's a spiritual component. And one of the things that Donald Schoen showed us in the 80s was the idea of reflective practice. So I'm putting these questions up before you see the film with hopes that that might shape a little bit of the discussion we have afterwards. What feelings did it generate, and how do we share those? What messages emerged from that you think we need to attend to? And what types of actions might arise from those feelings, from those ideas, from those thoughts? So I'm asking you to be reflective practitioners for the next 49 minutes and enjoy the film. Enjoy the film not in the sense that you're going to go out feeling wonderful, but in the sense that it is appealing to who you are, what you bring to the world, and what you're going to pass on to the world. So we'll roll it.
I'm here with 4 incredible young people here to talk about the issues that are so important of the day, and that is climate change is the center of this dialogue, but certainly all kinds of remarkable, incredible human stories I think are going to emerge with this kind of visiting that we're doing together today. So I'm really pleased to be here. I've been doing this work now for close to 30 years on humanizing the issue of climate change. And the world really doesn't know too much about the human aspect of climate change. And it has to be the forefront now. The topic has to be that. It has to be human issues, human rights issues. And it's just a thrill to be here today to share some of these stories with you and to hear your stories on the work that all of you are doing and the studies that you're in this beautiful setting that we're in here at the museum at UBC.
Okay, I can start. One of the pieces that I'm working with is on infusing climate education into the BC curriculum. And so thinking about how stories play such an important role with teaching our students and our youth about climate education. And so what I've really learned a lot in this piece was learning from different educators as well on how they're bringing climate education into the classroom, but then also learning from our students too and what they're grasping. My daughter's 9 and she's in grade 3, and so I feel I'm wearing the hat as a teacher, as a mother, and as a learner. And so one of the big things that I'm learning about is learning it from their point of view is the best way to teach them. And so that's a lot of listening and hearing their questions as well. And land-based learning has been one of the ways that I've incorporated climate education into the classroom for kindergarten all the way to grade 7.
Yeah, I think that's a really incredible thing. When I was growing up, I didn't grow up fully immersed in my culture, and I was actually immersed or enrolled in Catholic school. And just in education in general at that time, there wasn't a lot of talk about, respecting the land. It's not going out onto the land and learning about the tree with hands-on. That's something that's so crucial and something that I would have appreciated.
Where I grew up in the Himalayas is that basically the landscape and the trees or land-based learning was prevalent to us because the monasteries themselves carried history. The mountains, all of these were basically textbooks in their own sense. We were able to learn as children by interacting with them, but also creating a bond, a connection that kind of went beyond words, especially as we began to see that these entities as being more than just, I guess you could say, things, but actual living ancestors for us.
Yeah, I think that's really central to connecting people to this, or from the concept that it's a relationship, these are relatives, to get people to care about their relatives, and in doing that can get to address aspects of climate change and why we should care about those things and stuff. So I think that's really beautiful.
I'm glad that you're focusing a lot or introducing that to the younger generations even as well, because also where I grew up in Indonesia, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to have stepped outside the classroom to interact with some of my environment as well. Living in the tropics is very different from here in Vancouver, but I was able to learn from little sorts of activities that my classroom allowed me to interact with. And I feel that was probably why I value the environment so much now, just because I grew up always being so curious about touching things, learning from them.
We're always consuming things that we don't have a relationship with, or we don't know where it's coming from or where our food is coming from. And so I think it's a really beautiful thing to connect people with that again and once more, and especially the younger generations too.
So on the land programs are so important, not just in terms of knowing what nature can give you, but it's on the land healing as well is so really important. But we're finding that the kids that have been taught the real values and principles, but also the character building that happens on the land, the patience, the endurance, how to withstand stressful situations, to be bold under pressure. Ultimately, it's really to develop your sound judgment and wisdom, which is Siila Tunik in our language, is really key to teaching our children what has been so lost in institutional schooling. So learning, yes, is one great component of that, but the healing is also another great component of on the land programs.
And we've been talking a lot about intergenerational trauma, but thinking about intergenerational healing. And when I lost my mother in 2013 to cancer, I felt my spark was gone. And then I got pregnant with my daughter and I realized I need to make a change. And so I went out onto the land and I spent more time walking where she grew up in Steveston, because she moved from Bella Bella, where she attended the residential day school there, and moved to Steveston when she was 9 with her family. I just felt more connected to her. And I realized it was when I was out on the water and out on the land that I was just feeling my spark returning. And so I felt land-based learning. I didn't understand why it was so important to me until I started doing curriculum around it and unpacking why it was so transformative for me, and being able to bring our students who are dealing with so much. They have so much anxiety, they have so much worries, they're dealing with so much. If we can slow down and spend time in nature and just connect, I think they're able to use those tools when they're an adult.
And it's very transferable to the modern world. In fact, the kids that have been taught that, and they have that built-in capacity to deal with stressors by learning through culture and the land, are more apt to adapt to the modern world. And most people don't quite understand how is that done. But really, when you go out in nature, automatically nature is your teacher. And that's what happens there. Yeah.
I like how saying like the land is medicine, not only for like us physically, but also spiritually.
Oh, totally.
Like in my background, we try to cultivate something called dhyana, which is a form of like meditation. And so what it means is like we actually try to perceive all things as basically interconnectivity. So like even this tattoo of mine is the enso, and it means emptiness or dependent origination, which is a major concept amongst Buddhism and our people. But it's really this sense that like all things are interdependent of each other. And so whether it's our ancestors, our family and stuff, we are the sum of all that. We can see and communicate with our ancestors from our own selves. We are particles. We are made up of the same particles as the stars, the moons, the skies. And essentially, all that is encompassed in our body. And so how we communicate with our ancestors, which we do include as the landscapes, like the rivers, as the celestial bodies, we do that through introspection and meditation. In that way, we're speaking to our ancestors, we're speaking to other parts of ourselves that we might think are separate, but in truth, we're all just like embodied in a single cosmic form.
And when young people can reach back to culture and the land as the medicine, then that creates an opening for a real connection to what it is we want to protect. And that's our environment, that's our planet. So it all connects to the work of climate change, because we want to create a pool of championers now that have healed through culture, you know? And that's really important for that generation to make that connection to land and culture and to the environment, to become the next string of championers all over the world. I can see it already. There's stuff happening here with that deep understanding already. I mean, you don't have to be convinced. You're living it, and you're speaking it, and you're teaching it.
Connecting people to think about like nature or the earthly gifts as relatives. I wonder if when they're older, they'll be able to connect with it in that way as well, as opposed to something that, to extract or to be exploited.
Right.
Hopefully when they're older, they can think of it as a relative, taking care of your grandmother, right? And of course, it's okay, your family helps you and supports you, but you wouldn't deplete your relative of everything they have.
And so getting maybe to get the kids to think about knowledge as a gift, and how do we share it and how do we carry it, and thinking about the Museum of Anthropology as a place where we can bridge those cultural gifts and teachings, so that they're able to learn from those that want to share those gifts from a place of love and caring. Just as if we would learn from family members, it's shared through love.
I can see that there's like parallels in different, like maybe my own culture, though it is halfway across the world in Indonesia, there's parallels to other cultures in Indigenous communities in Canada as well. It's like weaving. I think that there was a little bit, or I was able to try it a bit when I was a kid, and though it would maybe have different supplies, I can appreciate like weaving that I can see within the Museum of Anthropology. There's time and effort and heritage. Oh yeah, one of the other things that we were touching on before was storytelling. I find that is so important, but so easily overlooked in today.
Undervalued.
Yes. Everything has a story, I feel like. Even if you stop and stare at a tree, how long was that tree there for? That's a story in itself.
A lot of what's contributing to the climate crisis is these high demands for consumerism or products that we don't know where are coming from, we don't have a relationship to. It's so easy to as a plastic like bottle, to think of it, to not think twice about it or something, where it's something that you've actually made with your hands and took the time to learn and such, I think is a way to address that.
And we're so used to being able to just go to the grocery store, going to a hardware store, and just like buying things, to the point where we have such a disconnect to the actual labor and energy that's been put into the products that are made, that we utilize, that we end up having no relationship with. And then it becomes, because of our current like society, we begin to create more of a connection with money, that actually we believe that, we're working for money, so that money can buy the magically made item that we can then use. But we don't actually have any relationship, and that continues to expand to being more extractive and more consumerist.
And at the same time too, even plus that, is that the world and I thought it was brilliant when somebody mentioned this before, and I use it all the time, have this nature deficit disorder, which can be the root cause of not connecting and loving and protecting what you love, because nobody has fallen in love with nature, as many Indigenous peoples have around the world who have not lost that connection. And so it really is about that love issue as well, of protecting what you love. And that's what we've been trying to do all these years, as many Indigenous peoples have been trying to protect what they love, to an audiences that really don't have that connection to nature. And so I thought that was a great phrase. Nature deficit disorder is what we're dealing with as well, not just commercialization and capitalism and so on, but people who don't have that loving relationship with nature. So we've got to tell our stories from that loving space of heart to be able to change their minds. We cannot any longer think our way through these issues. We've got to really just work from the heart and feel our way through. And I think that's the way to change the minds and hearts of people, not just speak to their heads, but speak to their hearts, And there are ways of doing that to make us feel like we're a common humanity in this world today, to address these issues together, no matter who we are.
I find that really important, because nature is all around us. We live off of nature. It should be the center of our culture. Like I think you were mentioning before, like hierarchy.
Yeah.
Like we should always be learning from everything, and everything can teach us a new thing, especially Mother Nature, like the earth.
I do believe that the West have become so accustomed to this idea of hierarchy, this idea of social Darwinism, that people need to be on top and there will be below. And that's what you mentioned, why there's some people that are resistant to Indigenous ways of living and thinking. They become blind to this idea of bonding relationships together rather than seeing everyone as competition.
Because they have that mindset that something has to be above or below.
Exactly, because it comes from a competitive capitalist mindset.
It's not about going back to we want to go back 200 years ago. It's about how we can move forward and do with what we have now, and how we can progress those ways while using Indigenous ways of knowing that are so crucial, especially in conservation.
Land-based learning, as we're finding, because as the institutions came into play and took over, in a sense, the way in which we lived, very traditionally with our own systems at play, they were replaced by institutions that were not a culture match whatsoever. And that severed everything. But we're finding that the treatment programs for addictions as well, and for kids learning about culture, is a really important aspect of not just helping them to become real good natural providers, and natural conservationists, but also the character building that comes with that, as I mentioned earlier, is really important. In terms of learning about the land. So we're finding that culture is our medicine, but we're also learning that our culture is the medicine the world seeks in understanding sustainability, And one of the things that I also teach and find or teach in all of the talks that I give is country food. We're so connected to our country food, right? What we hunt. But people don't realize that it's not just nutritional value, even though it's absolutely the most delicious food, and I'm biased, in the world, but there's also a lot of other values that we learn from our hunt and our country food. And nutritional value is one, but the cultural value, as I say, the teachings that come with that, but also the emotional value. It's almost therapeutic to be out there and learning all of these skills and sharing the food, the fairness, the respect and everything. And the spiritual value is really, really important to our country food as well as the communal value, and our medicinal value. Being out in nature, it's what it teaches you on so many of those levels.
That makes me think of cultural commons and how we're taught from usually our parents or our grandparents or our aunties or our uncles. And then having that, I grew up fly fishing with my dad, and my grandpa was a commercial fisherman. And so thinking about how much I learned on the water and how much I really connected to being out there and just having stories be shared when we were out on the boat together. And then also then to bring back home that food and provide for your family. It just is something I don't feel that connection to food anymore. We're so rushed and we just want to hurry up and eat, and we're not sitting at the table anymore, and no one gathers, and I barely have time to make myself food, let alone my daughter, so I focus on her. And so thinking about how food and how that's a big part of it as well.
This very strong disconnect from our food sources is astronomically a big problem in terms of climate crisis, because large majority of the vegetables that we grow go to feeding the meat industry, particularly factory farming of beef, because of this disconnect from where are we getting our food, and also we lose that community connection and we lose the spiritual importance. And then at the same time we kind of forget that these animals that are going on our dinner plate are living beings. They become a commodity rather than sentient beings that we have a relationship with. I remember we talked about that even when we go on hunts. There's an active relationship with that animal that you kill. And it's some people are like, oh, you're killing an animal.
It's life-giving life.
It is. The merit we gain is not from killing the animal, but from providing food to our community. And that's what's important, that's the key aspect. And so in both ways, we're trying to ensure that we're doing the maximum good in the world, even if we're taking life.
I think knowing where your food comes from, that's one aspect where it's very interesting, but also another opportunity to learn. You have a different appreciation towards it. That's culture right there with the food. Maybe you didn't prepare it yourself, but someone telling you that aspect of what you're eating. If it's part of someone's culture, there was meaning there. There has always been meaning in the past. So why can't I experience it myself or learn about other cultures?
If we could switch a little bit here, because there's a quote here I want to use in terms of what needs to change, what kind of real shifts and change has to happen. And during the pandemic, I was asked to speak to 1,200 scientists from 37 countries on a virtual conference that was hosted by Portugal at the time. And I had seen this remarkable quote by one of their own scientists, Gus Speth, a very well known from America. And I said, I'm going to use this in this particular keynote because I want to see what the scientists, if they're going to accept this, quote from one of their own. Because I found it very powerful. And this is what Gus Speth, he's a scientist, said. He said, I used to think that top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, environmental collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address these problems, but I was wrong, he said. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation, and we scientists don't know how to do that. And I wondered if they would take that. And they lapped it up because the pandemic was one of those moments, where you started to reflect differently. You started to ask yourself a lot of questions, no matter who you were, whether you were young or old, or students or working, or even scientists that were, trying to think differently about what could I be doing differently about this now that we're in this crisis. And I think, again, we have to go back to that issue of humanizing all of these issues. You know, I worked on connecting climate change to human rights because the world was not addressing these issues as urgently, and they still aren't, the issue of climate change. And certainly people know more about the wildlife of the Arctic than its people. And so humanizing the issue of climate change from an Arctic perspective was key to shifting some of the ways in which people deal with the Arctic issues, whether it's, you know, they're up there tapping into the resources now as we speak because of the melt. Rather than seeing the Arctic as an environmental disaster, they're seeing it as an opportunity to benefit more of these companies that are up there. And so, you know, it's to try to change that through the human stories. When it comes down to it, we're all human beings. All of these people who fight for status quo have children, you know, and it's not about necessarily just, you know, with kid gloves or being too soft about these issues, but really science, economics, and politics have not done much, you know, to address this issue. And I think we have to change the narrative now. And changing the narrative is important, especially for young people like yourselves, who are, this is your future. You're not yet mired in the politics of things. And it's important for you to speak from the heart and to speak from culture and land and really get things rolling in that way, you know? Yeah.
That makes me think of during the pandemic, I was studying my Bachelor of Education to become a teacher. And I took a class with Dr. Peter Cole from the Douglas First Nations, and he shared about making a place a special place. And we so often think of somewhere far distant like Hawaii or Mexico as somewhere special. Why not make our community, our neighborhood, our school grounds as somewhere special? And that can be done through story work, having our kids listening to stories out on the land, learning about stories, traditional ecological knowledge, having our kids make those connections to the trees as well. So I do branch weaving with our grade 6 students, and we go out to the land and we connect out there, and being out on the land and weaving together is just such a special moment where all that noise kind of fades and that we're able to just be with each other. And I've worked with teachers as well teaching this, and they said learning to work with their hands really brings them back to that learner role. And I think so often we see ourselves as experts and we're not learning.
And the moment, it brings you to the moment as well.
Absolutely, yes.
Rather than just all the chaos around us. And I know that our hunters, when they're out there on the ice waiting for long hours, almost in a yogic position over that little hole in the ice, waiting for the seal to surface, they call it their peaceful place. It's almost a meditative place. And our women too, when they're sewing or beading or cleaning the skins for clothing, making clothing, it's a meditative state. And so it's a very spiritual act, you know?
And I've heard our energy gets passed on when we are beading and we are doing that. Our energy is passed on to the thing we're making.
Yeah,
and
again, like
we gift
making
it.
things and building that relationship again, right? Passing energy into something that you're making. And it's what you're saying, or what you're mentioning, Brittany, is like why I went into education, because I started off in animal science and agriculture because I really wanted to help animals and the environment, and I thought, you know, being a veterinarian would be a good way to do that. But I soon discovered that, the animal science of it was more so looking at it as an object to be studied, and again, the program was kind of almost a continuation of the exploitive industries. Like, how can we support the farming industry further? It's an ideological issue as well, and it's not just loss of wildlife or, you know, climate change or deforestation. Those are all like symptoms of a greater issue, and I realized that, and I felt so overwhelmed at first. That's why I went into education, because I realized I could make a bigger impact starting there than I could just treating the symptom of the problem.
There is so much science and economic stuff out there. That is stuff that I have very much looked into, studied, researched regarding the Himalayas. However, the indigenous groups, the people who are most at stake, from Pakistan to Nepal, from the Tibetan Plateau, are still very much ignored on the global conversation, because even if you read like countless books on climate change, a lot of it is still very Western centric. It's over 2 billion people just on the continent of Asia, and like even the Himalayas, like the Tibetan Plateau provides water to almost 2 billion people. China is damming the Mekong River, and then India is damming the Ganges and Indus River. And that is also like really impacting local indigenous groups there that are most susceptible to the climate impacts. So we have like indigenous people in Bangladesh getting least amount of water because the Mekong River is being dammed and it's being controlled by either the wealthier Bangladeshis or by the Chinese government. And also goes to Myanmar and Cambodia, and all these other countries are kind of being ignored in terms of how dire the situation is regarding climate change, and how even these water sources are at stake because of the glaciers. And so, and all the time they're ignoring these indigenous pleas of the region of like, hey, these areas they might be sacred, but also like the way to handle them is not you to dam things, it's not you to fix the symptom, which is the constant glaciers melting and so forth. And so, yeah, and it comes back to what you're saying about like, there's this lack of community, there's this lack of listening to these voices of the most vulnerable in those areas. Even I find a lot of like global climate activists tend to forget about places like Africa, like Asia, especially when it comes to things like renewable energy, how a lot of our renewable energy still comes at the cost of indigenous people, it's a new form of like, one could say green colonialism or green extractivism, where we need like wind turbines, or we need like solar panels. Yeah, and so like they have those being extracted in places like the Tibetan Plateau for copper, or that are being used by forced labor in Xinjiang, or being like enslaved cobalt mines in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We're seeing such violent forms of extractivism in this name of like greening our current lifestyle. And a lot of that is forsaken or ignored because we lose that relationality that you're talking about.
I find really troubling is that even in the Arctic, many of our own people, because that's the only carrot being dangled in front of them, and they're poor and need jobs to feed their families with, because the cost of living in the Arctic is 2 to 3 times the cost of here, for example, are starting to move in that direction. And they have. And people are trying to stand up for their own rights against that kind of development, because it really is buying into the companies, unsustainable companies that are at the root cause of the melt of the Arctic to begin with. Exactly. And then some of the jobs that they're given are menial. They're not even jobs that are that can be transferred. The skills can't be transferred elsewhere. But lots of them who go into the mining companies' work, many of them, and I've heard some of them before, quit because it just doesn't feel right. Digging up the land that they've held sacred for so many, for millennia, for decades upon decades. So that's the troubling part of it, where we have to start that dialogue as well. Don't buy into that too quickly. I know we're desperate for jobs, but if you buy into that too quickly, we're adding to the very problems that we're facing, that what we're trying to help negotiate the world to stop doing, because we have our international organizations, and I've held positions there for 11 years in the past, where you go to these meetings, the Conference of the Parties, the UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And but what's going to start to happen if we continue to go into those sustainable activities, we will lose our high moral ground at the international level, because people will say, well, you're just like China and Brazil, who don't want, who are developing and don't want any part of this. You're developing the same way. Why would we listen to you? Whereas we've had big impacts before on the persistent organic pollutants. And I think we changed the discourse on the language of climate change, making it a human rights issue. You know, we may not have made headway with the Inter-American Commission on Climate Change on human rights in Washington, but at least we helped to change the discourse on the language of climate change from one that's not just politics, economics, and science, but one that's a human dimension and a human rights issue. And so it's that whole history, you know, of being used way back in the 1940s to meet the global market for fur. We became fur trappers in the Arctic to meet that global market, and now here we are being used to become maybe the energy, feeders of the world through oil and gas in the Arctic. But we not only have to be savvy, we have to be very wise about the direction we're taking in the Arctic, to stand on our values and principles and say, no, thank you. We're not open for business necessarily, you know? But it's happening, though. It's happening, and we've got to get the younger generation on board to say we've got to do things differently. The narrative has to change, and we have to be more creative and innovative as to how we develop. And we need to make the choice, not others for us.
Or pulling on making it, like you're saying, a human rights issue, and making it so that people are acting with their hearts, because you can present all the facts or all the scientific facts, and that doesn't make me want to act on it or, you know, protect it.
I feel like with people, if you give them the facts, if you give them the numbers, they will just they let it go over their head. They let the big idea, it's too big to really fathom for my oneself. So that's what I feel like a lot of people nowadays, without that connection that you were talking about, they just, it's not something that I can care about. But
if you don't add that like human aspect, otherwise they leave it to the experts, the politicians.
The government will
the government will fix it.
The most disconnected people in the world,
Exactly,
right?
They leave it to the like oil baron, they leave it to like a lot of like non-profits that are actually like conglomerates under billionaires. And so they leave it to these people, or like a single climate activist like Greta Thunberg to like save the world. And so they're like, oh, it'll be fine.
By raging.
Exactly. It'll be fine. They just leave it be. Like, I care, but at the same time,
it's not my problem.
It's not my problem, or it's like, I don't know enough. But then, like, as you mentioned, your heart knows more than the universe can even comprehend. And so, like, by speaking to that, people are able to actually see. Exactly. And they don't need politicians or billionaires.
And it's interesting that those, like, they're making all, like, the decisions, but they're the people who have the least interaction with that, like, area, or even with the community that's there. And yet they're making all these, you know, world-changing decisions. I'm thinking that their expert opinion is what is, but really, look, where has that gotten us? So
and these international treaties, you know, that people go off to, and I've been, you know, for 11 years I was doing that. You're like a side event, you know? You're not actually part of the negotiate, although with the POPs Treaty, the persistent organic pollutants, we were able to, it was a smaller group of people, but the climate change ones, the Indigenous peoples have side events to that. They're not part of the negotiations. They're not even in the room of the plenary, you know? So there's not an impact, the human impact can't be made if you're not in the room of the negotiators. And there's about, 20,000 people at these international treaties. And what happens even before you get there is all of the bureaucrats, that are sent off to these climate change meetings are not going there to change the world. They don't get up and say, what can I do to fix this problem? What can I do to change my ways? They go there to fight status quo. And who is that I'm up against? Which countries are I'm up against? So that's what they do throughout the entire thing. That's why there's a few steps made forward and then many backwards each year as you go. And it's just a very paralyzing system that we have with that as well. So
maintaining hope and maintaining being optimistic and carrying it on is definitely something that's difficult in these kinds of conversations, especially when you're conversing with somebody who doesn't have that relationship or isn't willing to see it from that perspective. It can just be so disheartening. And
especially with teaching our kids, a lot of it is like climate hopelessness. and that they feel that they
yes.
can't make a difference, or they think the only difference they can make are these large impacts. But why not start small and start with little things that you can do?
Yeah.
But then how do we teach our kids to make those important changes?
Yes, and let me, and don't mind me, because some quotes have just stayed with me so much and have helped me with my work. So I want to share this piece because it comes down to personal transformation. And I say that when people say, what can I do? I say, start with self. Start with self. And this is a quote that I've used. Personal transformation can and does have global effects. As we go, so goes the world, for the world is us. And the revolution that will save the world is ultimately a personal one. And I add, personal transformation can lead to human revolution. Yeah.
I don't think we're beyond a point where that can't still happen. You know, personal transformation is still possible within each and every one of us.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm glad you mentioned that because as an individual thinking about the climate crisis, I believe that my part is important, and I will continue to always learn and try to make the right decision from what my heart believes. But I always, it's kind of complicated sometimes when I try to convince other people of it. So, trying to keep myself strong with my beliefs in this way, and always I know that I need to try to express it to other people as well, because I want other people to also look at the environment as how I see it, how important it is in all our lives. So I'm really glad that you guys are really working on humanizing this aspect, really talking to people land-based learning, and just knowing how to really reach people properly to get the point across, because as an individual I find it hard.
Obviously, we all know that Indigenous peoples have always had a connection with the land, and so it's about repairing the connection that we already have.
I feel like in the Museum of Anthropology, there's this little farm in the back where the Indigenous peoples, they are still able to farm. The MOA acts as both a museum and also a place where the communities can come, as well as come to the Haida House that we are here right now, and use the space. So it can be both a place of learning as well as multiple different ways of using it, both for the local community and for anyone visiting as well. Maybe having more places like this, different ways of interacting with it, can be really useful in the future.
And I think even though I guess I'm considered Gen Z, there's always there has been that constant looming fear of
but we've always had
have children. Is the world gonna be habitable? And not just in terms of the ecosystem, but in terms of conflict and prices and all that come from the climate crisis, and including possibilities of water wars, which is a whole other conversation. Climbing a mountain is like climbing onto the lap of a mother. Instead of rather climbing a mountain and seeing it as humans' domination over nature and our conquest. It's we're actually, in a way, you're reconnecting children back to the mother of all mothers, the thing that sustains us all, our world. So again, thank you for bringing me hope.
It's creating a new generation of those who are connected, and will be the championers forever. Yeah. Absolutely. Great work.
Thank you. That's really amazing. Thank you. I appreciate that. And it gives me a lot of hope. The way that they're interacting with it is just really meaningful. And they're seeing it differently.
I feel like I'm learning so many new ways that you were talking about, how we're part of the cosmos, and how looking at a mountain is like a mother. I was some things that I never really thought to look at before, but kind of got a little bit of goosebumps.
Yeah, there's so much to take away from this conversation. I really am learning a lot from each and every one of you. So.
In the time of climate despair, it's incredibly important for us to remember not to have this idealistic perception of us being saviors as individuals of having to complete everything, but rather is to remember to have the strength to be kind and the wisdom to act, to be kind with those around you, to work together and not just sustain our world, but to sustain our relationships and sustain the feeling of love within our hearts. So, and that is how we continue to strive for climate hope.
That was well said. Yeah, well said. That warmed my heart.
Great.
I feel all warm now.
And just going off of that, Elder Vincent Stogan talks about 7 generations forward and 7 generations back, and that we're reaching our hands forward to pass on that knowledge, but we're also reaching our hands back to our elders and those behind us. So I appreciate that that's how you want to address climate education, and thank you.
In every action that I do, and even like the career that I choose, I'm always thinking about doing it for my family, doing it for my family in the future, but also some family that has passed as well, making them proud and knowing like what my ancestors would want. And I think, yeah, so honoring them as we move forward and such, yeah, it's something that I always think about.
Just this session alone gives me hope from hearing all of you, and the wisdom that you have at your younger age is really hopeful for me. I think it's, the connections that I make in the talks that I give, the youth, that are not mired in the politics of things, are thinking deeply and feeling deeply about these issues, and are much more grounded, in my opinion, than any politician I've ever worked with. And I think the solutions lie with your generation. I realize it's a huge expectation, but you're up to the task. And I think you can really do this. But I want to end on conscious leadership, because one of the things that I'm learning all the time, even at this grand age, I just turned 70 this year, learning about myself and how I should, lead, not elected positions. I was in those positions before, but you're very contained in those positions and limited. But I still learn about the style that I have, and I have been, not by many, but critiqued once in a while to say, if I were you, I would be raging. I would be screaming at the top of my voice. And I would always say, but that's not me. That's not how I work. That's not authentic to myself. And I was raised traditionally very much by only a grandmother and a mother, that raging is not part of the equation if you're going to make any effective change with people or issues. And so this year I came across a book called Cassandra Speaks by Elizabeth Lesser. And it blew me away, because it confirmed the style in which I have led all these years. And she says a couple of things that I want to end on. Wise conscious leadership knows the difference between strength and force. Strength comes from a deep inner confidence, from loving and respecting and expressing one's own authentic self. Whereas force comes from a deep inner wound and spawns the urge to dominate and even the score. And we see that all over the world today. We see that with the wars. We see how people are, targeting women and children even. And she says, and this is the part that just blew me away, because I said, okay, I'm on the right track, I'm okay. When she says there's a difference, conscious leadership, there's a difference between outrage and rage. Outrage is holy anger, triggering a strong emotional response to the pain of others, but never dehumanizing others, and fills her sails to persuade, guide, and create. Whereas rage is like a forest fire. It is impatient, vindictive, and short-sighted. And so that generation, if you can maintain that calm, that clarity, and that focus from that position of love, we are making much headway if we go in that direction for your generation. So I leave you with that and say thank you for this opportunity today as well. I'm blessed. Thank you. It's been great.
Thank you, and I want to on all of our behalf, thank Frank for the distillation that's in this film, the distillation of knowledge, distillation of feelings, some aspects of the distillation of hope. So thank you, Frank. And we wanted to take this opportunity to begin a dialogue with the group, and we had asked you to kind of reflect on these questions or other thoughts that you may have. I think feedback to Frank will be really helpful. There's more films to be made, and how this happens can be part of it. And also to reflect on what are those feelings, and what will you do with those feelings? Is it something that we had an aha moment? What my wife not infrequently says, "Oh, Bob, you've just had one of your blinding flashes of the obvious." And so if you've had one of those blinding flashes, share them over the next while. So we'd like to have a dialogue, and we'd also, I'm not sure, how are the folks online communicating with us? Okay, great. So if you, what thoughts do people have in terms of their feelings and please.
Thank you very much. David Edgington. Question perhaps for Joanne. The issue of land-based education came up in the film. I'm not familiar with this. Could you give us some clues as to what it means?
Sure. Well, land-based education can range anywhere from what was said by one of the students, that you could learn about your neighborhood, go outside in the playground to learn more about what's around you, to go into the park, to perhaps going to an Indigenous place in a community that means something to the people. For example, one of the Stallo stories talks about a community and the place where that community originated. And so students learning, and then it was First Peoples 12 course. The students went on a field trip to that place to hear the stories that came from that place and why, for example, that big rock was important to the people. So that's another way, to just being out in nature in different ways, learning. So it can mean many different things for a place, whether it's the environment or the place in which you live. Oh, and there's questions if you want to ask Frank, too, about the film.
Yeah, or comments you want to make. We'd like to have a dialogue. Please, go ahead.
How were the participants selected for the film?
That's a good question. I wandered around campus. I ended up having random conversations with I don't know how many students. If the conversation, the person was really interesting and really interested in what we got into conversation about, I made them aware of what we were doing and asked them to, pursue it further. So I ended up with a roster of students. We also advertised it through the Emeritus College. Any students that were interested, Sarah helped with that. So we ended up with a list of students, and then I spent a lot of time talking with them, interviewing them, and working with my co-producer, who was also a young woman who spent a lot of time in different universities, and we put together, we identified for this film 4 students that we thought would be really interesting to see them working together with Siila. The first film, Voices, there were 5 students, and I actually spent more time wandering around campus because that was the first film we did, identifying students for that, especially international students that were, turned out to be knowledgeable, interested, and passionate about the subject matter. So There were a number of ways in which we identified students, some of them rather unconventional.
Please, have you got a...
Thank you for who's ever put this together, the group. Look at us. We're a group of senior, older academics, and our responsibility, in a positive sense, is we're released to take some things seriously, and your production hits me that way. Age isn't important, whether they're 20, 21, or 80. I'm 82. Why isn't UBC a place where we have, when entrance occurs, it's a required course for everybody at the beginning, whether it's in the sciences, the arts, or whatever, and it could be 21 units or whatever days of awareness, because this is a crisis. I didn't come here to find out it was a crisis. I knew it was, but you people are stepping into something, but we're very privileged educators. Don't we have a responsibility in our relations to students? We were teachers here. So why hasn't this gone to the Senate? What about Benoit and the people in the critical position of post-secondary institutions? And so you talk about the film having emotions. You bet it's got emotions. And it's not like, wow, isn't this a great subject? What are we doing at UBC? Let's start there. I mean, we're getting funded to have an Emeritus College. This is one of the relevant tasks. And I think you stimulated that notion in my mind is an action. The other thing I want to say, and I can talk too long, so you have to stop me, but the last thing is this, and I have my colleague here, all my relations, I hear about that in the cultural sense. Today is the first day. When I grew up, relations meant relatives. For the Indigenous people saying, you have this term, no. You've convinced me it's the relations to the earth, to the institutions. So I really wanted to say I'm so impressed what you have done here in terms of my awareness. And we're part of this institution. So all of a sudden I'm impassioned. I think the emotion is impassioned to, why is this a secret? A group of 70 people getting in this insight. What if every student coming in takes a prerequisite? Introduction to the new world of climate.
Well, there's something. There's something.
Marvin,
Thank you for
Marvin,
indulging me.
I heard you volunteering to join the cohort, and I invite you as a perhaps next step to do that, because I know your passion, I know your background in understanding the influence of trauma and understanding the influence of conflict, which was also mentioned there, and so all of this can come together, and what I am hoping we can have, I'm just going to turn it over to Frank in a second, but what I hope we can have is some united action that comes out of this, and that's what the distillation of what you said is. It's not enough for us to listen and to say, gee, they're doing good stuff. It's how do we get together to do it.
Well, when it comes to the university, we've tried. We worked on, and Bill Reese played a major role in this, putting together a proposal for an international symposium which would look at this subject, that would look at the climate crisis as a profoundly cultural matter. And we sent a proposal to the president, we sent it to the provost, it was shared with the deans of the different faculties on campus, and to put it bluntly, we got nowhere. They basically said, well, we don't have the money for this, and we're just, doing something that big, bringing in, scholars and people from not just academics, but community-based knowledge from different places in the world in order to take a look at this. We can't do that. So it hasn't been done. I've spent a lot of time. In fact, I was over at the Sustainability Hub on Monday, where they had many students from the Faculty of Education looking at how to get, the climate change issue and sustainability into the curriculum. And, it was well-intentioned, but, it missed the point. I mean, it was, planning and recycling and, and on and on and on. A whole lot of things that are not irrelevant, but they in and of themselves aren't going to do the job. It's the way we think, which is why the concept of all my relations is so important. It's the relationship that we've lost with the world in which we live. And I'm putting it simply, but that is at the root of the problem, and that is what we are not dealing with. We are dealing with tinkering around with sort of quasi-social technical fixes, which we've been doing for decades and decades, and things have gotten worse and worse. There is something wrong with this picture.
What I'd like to do, if I may, is ask us to, we can point fingers and we can despair. The despair is a narcotic that lets us give up. And but what I would love to hear people, I heard Marvin say that, hey, there's some hope in this film. Yeah. There's some direction in this film. There's some generational change in this film. So if we could be thinking about what could we do next that's going to make a difference, not only in the university, but as well. Sarah.
I have two questions from online. The first one is, how do we reconciliate the needs of the global population with climate control?
Could you repeat it again?
How do we reconciliate the needs of the global population with climate control?
How do we do that? Oh, of course, that's a simple question. We work harder. Actually, I think the threads of that, and thank you for asking that question, because the threads, if you listen to the way that those students from around the world interacted and what their reflections of how to begin that reconciliation, how to have that reconciliation start in your heart and move out from there. But, I'm going to turn to Joanne to address the question, because the reconciliation that our society is going through, in particular relation to the Indigenous relationships and what's happened there, there's a lot of lessons, not only in the basis of Indigenous culture, but in the way that's evolving in a creative way.
I want to go back to that question about what's place-based education, because this connects to that question, where these the students, they talked about whether they were growing up or as young adults connecting to nature, to their environment by spending time in nature, and that's what I think today, where teachers may have their students go and spend time with some aspect of nature. And by doing that, first of all, the university student said, what does it do to my spirit, my soul, to my heart? And then also, how can we think about nature? And in education, when students are out in nature, of course, they can learn about science. They can learn actually about mathematics, and they can learn more about, how that ecosystem works together, or what creates difficulties. And the quote of the young fellow say, climbing the mountain is like climbing onto your mother's lap. That really is a shift, and so I think we can learn from these young people. We talk about intergenerational learning, like us olders can pass on to the youngers, which is true. But at the same time, we can learn from the young people, like we are learning from these young folks. And the same one with nature, their environment. If we observe, if we're with nature and be patient and open, we can learn from that experience. And so I think if you know, Indigenous peoples over time have been passing on these teachings. And if we, in whatever space, be it education or in health or whatever area, if we are open to learning from Indigenous perspectives, they will help us be good, you know, be good to ourselves, to each other, to the environment, perhaps. So, and it's not easy. Siila Watt-Cloutier said, it isn't easy. Indigenous people have lots of issues that have been forced on them. And so there's also that reclamation movement. And that's where it's important to have the allies. Back to Marv, what you're saying. Well, we as Cohort went to the university leadership and they didn't get the point that we were trying to make. But perhaps others could help make the point too. It's not that we should give up, but we should keep trying. And that's what I think part of this is. We have to keep trying, right?
Well said. Do you have another question there? And then John.
Okay. I have an answer. We talked about the faculty of education that you met Frank Tester. And so Linda Leonard from nursing says, the UBC School of Nursing offers a course open to all UBC students on the impact of climate change on health, a unique exploration of how human activities impact our health and livelihoods. So there is a course, I don't know what is similar, but Linda wanted to share that. And then we have Bill Rees online, and he is having 2 questions. There are lots of sources telling society what must be done, stop fossil fuels. Everyone just has stepped up much simpler lifestyles, etc. But very little discussion of how to see that these changes are done. How do we convince a culture that has been accustomed to more and better, to infinity, to accept a lifestyle that assumes less is more? More simply, we are talking about cultural transformation. How, historically, have such massive changes in cultural mindset and narrative taken place? So that's from Bill.
Bill and I were having a conversation about that, so maybe I could throw my 2 cents worth in. One thing that we need and that we've lost is the sense of community, that people working together. In urban environments, of course, intimate conversations with and contact with nature is somewhat limited. It's probably better in Vancouver than in many parts of the world, given what surrounds us. But having urban environments which invite and make possible relationship with nature is really important. I think every high-rise building, for example, in the city should not be allowed unless they are willing to incorporate a rooftop garden. Just for one example. I mean, there are lots of things that we could do in large urban environments to change the direction that things are going in. And community is really part of it. And this is where you get into housing. You know, one way in which people come together is, and I've had a lot of experience with this, is co-op housing. You know, I think that most of the housing ought to be co-op housing, because co-op housing creates a community, and communities, when they get together, look after the grounds, they look after the garden, they put in a vegetable garden as part of the co-op if they've got, you know, a space and room has been provided for that sort of thing. And people, when they come together, start to talk about what's important. And let's face it, there isn't a subject out there, as far as I'm concerned, that's more important than the climate environment emergency. So how we organize ourselves and how we come together as people, working together, thinking together, and making a connection, restoring a relationship with nature is really important. What does it take to do that?
Right, and thank you. I just want to go back to the comment about the nursing course. So, you know, you've outlined some very important pieces of how we can work together, very important pieces of how we can arrange to work together, important pieces of how we can link to the land to work together. And there was an allusion in the film to how we worked together, which was quite remarkable during the time of COVID. That we recognized we needed each other. We recognized that we needed to change our behavior to protect each other. It was a remarkable thing, but we've gotten away from that. But back to the nursing course, what we, I think, need to do is say, What can we learn from that? That's a pioneering course. How do we integrate that into the overall planning of the university? And I think that's part of what we're moving towards. And the more allies that we can have to help move the university collectively towards that. Let me give you an example. A young graduate student was subject to abuse. She undertook and is still working on the idea of changing the culture of the university to be more kind. We've met with the president on that, with the MP on that issue, who's Musqueam, and moving those kinds of things forwards. What I think we need is to build on what was happening and what is positive, the kinds of land-based education and so on. But we need each other. We need each other across disciplines. We need each other in across generations and everything. So I want to just emphasize, I think, part of what Frank was saying. We need the community to help us to work better together. The culture of this place, and this was striking to me when I first came here after 20 years outside, is fractionating knowledge into ever finer fractions, fractionating our training rather than our education into ever finer and defined professions. So part of what we need to do, and part of what I would ask those of you who are interested in doing, is join us in trying to connect not just with each other, but with the community. My observation, I have never seen interprofessional work succeed at all until it was grounded in community.
Yeah.
So it's taking that holistic view and working together. And that requires, I think, us to keep our index finger in our back pocket and not wave it at everybody and saying, you're the problem, you're not doing it, you're not doing it. I think we know enough to know that that's not likely to be helpful. But what is going to be helpful are looking back at our own lives, looking at those times in our life when we were most fulfilled. These young people were talking about the experiences that they had, and they were sharing what they had. So how do we do that? There's a structural point to it, that maybe the combined Emeritus group can help foster. There's a communication part of it that I think can move us forward. But this is, I guess, a plea. It's not just the cohort's job. It's all of our jobs. And we as academics are privileged, and society, we owe society something. And so I'm asking that people think about it. When you wake up tomorrow morning, drop us a note, say what just share your ideas.
With any more questions? Yeah.
And John, yeah, I was just
He wants to
pointing
speak.
to John.
This on? Yeah. John Miller, I'm a recent recruit to the Climate and Culture Cohort. My background is in public health, population and public health. And I'm picking up on what Frank said. The challenge before all of us here is we've got to change minds. We've got to change a way of thinking. And I'm just finishing this book by Jason Hinkle, which picks up on those words, less is more. And making the point that we have, all of us, I certainly have been a victim of it, growing up in capitalism. We've been taught that more growth is essential. And our board of governors at UBC buys the same story. So they don't want to hear about change and revolution. They're just doing fine, thanks, with the existing system. So we don't get a reaction. I've sent papers to the Prime Minister, to my MP. You don't get reaction because they're under the same influences. But I'm the passion, the emotion I've had out of to answer your first question. I love the difference between rage and outrage. because I go back and forth between the two. I'm outraged by the fact that nothing's happening. And I'm used to taking action. I was a bush surgeon for long enough. When I see an emergency, I know what the hell to do. Get on and do it. And that briefing, Frank, that you've seen from the UK back in January.
Yeah.
What was it called? Climate emergency briefing. 1,200 people in Westminster, and they said, guess what? This is an emergency. But nothing's happened since, even in the UK, let alone here. So let's get outraged and let's get our politicians on board.
Okay. Other reflections? Please.
I got 2 more reflections online. This is from Paul Harrison. UBC has many groups working on aspects of the climate crisis, sustainability, etc. And the university sometimes proudly offers them to the public and to us within UBC as an integrated set of activities. Have you tried to work with any of them? And if so, what has been the outcome?
And I would say, yes, there have been attempts, and it's worth reflecting that this is true out in communities as well. There are many wonderful things, many wonderful people, many wonderful organizations, but it's a little bit like Brownian motion. It's not coordinated, and that's, I think, what the cohort is talking about in part, is not just the knowledge, but the engagement of all the sectors in society with each other, so that they stop pointing at each other and saying they're the problem, and actually get together in a coherent way. And that is one of the hopes, if that answers to some extent the question.
Part of the problem is the university is, as somebody's already pointed out, a whole bunch of silos. So everybody is doing something that fits with whatever discipline we're talking about. And what we really need is to start connecting things. The silos are a problem. I can give you lots of examples of that, but if you're going to deal with a climate environment emergency, you really have to be interdisciplinary. And you can see that from the things that students were saying. We're talking about human rights. We're talking about food production. We're talking about how people live and work together. We're talking about fill in the blank. I could go on with a long list. And when you're working in silos, pulling all of those things together in something that makes for an effective and coherent whole is extremely hard, if not almost impossible to do. The university, the way it's structured, not only with respect to this issue, as far as I'm concerned, is part of the problem. And it's perpetuating the problem by the way in which knowledge is handled within an institution, as this discipline, that discipline, this way to, et cetera, et cetera. When there needs to be a whole lot of things shared across the board. And I've had personal experience with that, working with graduate students in the field who had a degree in biology, suddenly find themselves confronting, what are really ethical problems. But they've never dealt with ethics before. They're not quite sure what it is when they encounter it. It's not been part of their training as biologists, etc. I mean, run into problems like I could go on, like that all the time.
Okay, we've got the point.
I'd like to add.
I'd just like to turn. Okay. Does anybody have something in the next short time, a good experience they've had in bringing things together, bringing ideas together? The idea of, again, hearkening back to the nursing, how do we learn from things that are working? How do we expand those going forward? Any thoughts that anybody has? Please. Speaking of nursing. Yeah, they can't hear you online if you're not on.
Okay. Well, Bob, because you were part of the group that worked with interdisciplinarity as far as maternity care was concerned. And the way we brought people together was I opened my home, and we had coffee and food, and we had midwives and nurses and OBGYNs residents and family practice residents, and we came together and we talked and we shared how we could work together as a group of people for the betterment of women and babies.
And that's a good example, and things rolled out into the communities. the north end of Vancouver Island, where nursing, social work, medical students were all in the community at the same time, you know, and they, yeah, no, it's an excellent example of if we can. I think it's easier in health than it is with other things, but let's be inspired by that and by your leadership in that, you know, because putting the coffee on the table was hugely important.
Yeah, I want to applaud Wendy for bringing up that example. The risk in all issues is to set up a binary, us versus them. And Bob, you've referred to that pointing finger. Let's be very careful to not say, this side is this way and this side is this way. All universities are like this, and all Indigenous peoples, First Nations are like this. Let's be careful with that kind of language that there are many examples of coming together with conversations. We can say urban, but within this urban environment, there are Indo-Canadian communities, there are Amish communities I know of who are very community-based, who have a completely less is more. They've published books decades ago on, and working together. There are many examples in the urban culture. So bifurcating, putting one over there and one over there is not productive.
What a wonderful and inspirational way to close this session, and I want to thank you for that. We didn't pay her, actually. But that idea of coming together instead of pointing fingers. I want to turn it over to Joanne to have some last summative thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Well, in my Coast Salish Stalo tradition, I raise my hands and thanks and respect to everyone for coming here today to listen, to hear, to speak, hopefully after this to do. We are, as a cohort, appreciative of the support of the Emeritus College and the former Peter Wall Institute for Advanced Studies for helping to fund the film, which has created the opportunity for us to get together and watch, learn, discuss, and then hopefully take some wise action. And I think that as a cohort, we learn to share and to get people together. You know, we want to talk about the hard issues. We want to get a sense of also what can we individually do and what can we cooperatively do. And by sharing ideas, by raising those critical questions, I think that helps us. So we do hope you go away today where you can further reflect about the feelings that have come to you based on the young people and Siila Watt-Cloutier as the elder, you know, what they have shared and what you take away from their experiences, you know, what messages, you know, are there in that film about our climate and culture emergency. And then also to think about then, what can I do? Or what would you like Emeritus College to do or the cohort here to do? And as was mentioned earlier, you know, we welcome some new members to the cohort as we continue to figure out what we can do together, how we can make this meaningful change within UBC and outside UBC too. So thank you everyone for being with us today.
I just want to thank all three of you. When I saw this film, I was really moved and touched, and I could see why the audience here, you are as well. Before I move on, could you just introduce the young people that are here? Because there's some young people in the audience that, yes, Frank, where's Frank? Frank, just to tell us who they are.
Well, they're an enthusiastic bunch of students,
Good.
2 of whom I met in a coffee bar, and we're having the most amazing discussion sitting right beside me. So I can't remember what I said, but I joined the conversation with some comment, and we ended up, spending, it was at least an hour, maybe more, in a really fabulous conversation. I learned a heck of a lot. And it was just a great exchange of ideas, and I invited them to come and sit in on this and maybe participate in what we're doing going forward. So I'd like to thank them for coming. And do you want to say anything, or do you want me to pass the mic to you? You can make a comment or 3, because your voice, as far as I'm concerned, the future is yours, and your voice is consequently most important.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to thank Frank for inviting us. I feel like really special and honored to be here and be part of this conversation. And I really love the energy that all of you guys have. It's really, really similar to a lot of people in our generation. And I think it's really cool that, these 2 generations have such similar thoughts. And we can really go somewhere.
Well, thank you.
Well said.
That's a very nice compliment to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, this way? Okay, I'm not good at the word. The other thing that I personally was in a situation walking into a hostile environment, which was interdisciplinary, and it was just what you said about finger pointing, and we had been accused, or my group had been accused of being the problem. So my take, when I walked in, I said, look, we're not the problem. We want to help the solutions. It's not you and me. So that's exactly, we want to be part of the solutions. Yeah, no, I believe what you said. And having faced that professionally, I saw the positive effect it had. But there are a few takeaways that I just feel I want to just repeat as I thank you. The concept of nature deficit disorder, that really resonated with me. I thought that was very, very well said. And also the lack of listening, acting with your heart, and issues. We know the issues with politicians. We know how that works. I don't have to. And also, you talked in the movie about personal transformation. And I think that really resonates as well, that what you're talking about is transformation, and all of us looking at transformation. So thank you all. The last thing I will say is that on behalf of the Emeritus College, we are very proud that we have been able to sponsor you on the first 2 films that you've done. And I'm going back to something I said in the business part of my meeting. This funding is because of donations, and your donations are important to fund projects like that, because you all know the university is in a budget crunch. We're looking at issues differently than we've ever looked before, and we want to move forward. We want to change, as we said, whatever we can do to help change and transformation positively. So I want you to know you have our support, but we also need a little other support. So on behalf of the college, this is our thank you. Thank you. And where's Frank? That's for Frank. So thank you all for coming. Yes, you could.
Can I thank you and the college for supporting Sarah to support us, because we would not be a group without her. So thank you.
Good. Well, now there are some more desserts, coffee, tea. Please enjoy your time. And we are having our next meeting is May 12th. May 12th. So we hope to see you all there.